What if one of the most important women in human history never had her name recorded in the Bible? What if the mother of a nation, the partner of the world's firstborn son, the bridge between Eden and civilization, simply vanished into the silence of Scripture? We all know the story of Cain and Abel. Two brothers, one offering accepted, one heart turned dark. The first murder. But hidden just beyond that well-told tale lies a question few dare to ask. When Cain was exiled, when he left the presence of the Lord, when he built a city and fathered a son, who was the woman by his side? The Bible tells us he had a wife, but not her name, not her origin, not even a whisper of where she came from. For centuries, this mystery has stirred the hearts of scholars, believers, and seekers alike. How could Cain have had a wife if Adam and Eve were the only humans on earth? Were there others? Were there forgotten daughters of Eden, born in the shadow of the fall, destined to carry life forward in a broken world? Today, we step into that silence, into the blank spaces between the verses, because sometimes what the Bible does not say speaks just as loudly as what it does. And if we listen closely, we may uncover a truth more surprising, more sacred, and more meaningful than we ever imagined. Let us begin. A mystery, born in blood. The story of Cain and the question no one can answer. It began with a field, quiet, empty. And then a cry, the cry of blood from the ground. Cain and Abel were the first brothers born into a world still echoing the breath of God. Raised outside the gates of Eden, they grew into men shaped by different paths. Cain, a tiller of the soil. Abel, a keeper of flocks. Two sons offering gifts to the Creator, hoping to be seen. But only one was accepted, not because of what he brought, but because of what was in his heart. When God looked upon Abel's offering with favor, something dark awoke in Cain. A seed of jealousy, a shadow of resentment. And in the silence between brothers, something irreversible took root. Cain lured Abel into the open field and struck him down. No witnesses, no warning, just the first death, the first taste of human blood soaking into the earth. But even more mysterious than the crime was what came after. God confronts Cain, not with wrath, but with a question. Where is your brother? Cain's answer cold and defiant. I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? Yet the ground itself testifies. The voice of Abel's blood cries out, and justice demands response. So Cain is sentenced, not to death, but to exile. Cast away, marked by God, destined to wander east of Eden. Yet even here another puzzle emerges. A line tucked deep in Genesis 4. It says Cain knew his wife, and she bore him a son, Enoch, a child, a legacy, a city built in the name of that son. But wait, where did this wife come from? If Adam and Eve were the only humans alive, if Cain had just been exiled, if no other people existed, then who was this woman? How could she exist? And why does the Bible never tell us her name? This is the moment the silence begins to speak, and the story takes a turn into the forgotten corners of Genesis, where daughters are unnamed, and legacies are hidden in plain sight. Because to understand who Cain's wife may have been, we must first explore the invisible lineage of Adam and Eve's daughters. Let us step deeper into the silence, the forgotten daughters of Adam and Eve. In Genesis 5, verse 4, a quiet sentence appears, one that many readers pass over without pause. It says that Adam lived 800 years after the birth of Seth. And during that time he had sons and daughters. Sons and daughters. It is one of the most understated verses in Scripture. Yet it holds a profound truth. Adam and Eve were not the parents of only 3 sons. Their family was large, sprawling, multi-generational. And within that unseen family tree were daughters, many daughters, born into silence, unnamed, but absolutely essential to the survival of humanity. Why then are they not mentioned by name? Why are their stories not recorded? Part of the answer lies in the nature of ancient genealogies. In Hebrew tradition, as with many early cultures, lineage was traced through the male line. Names were recorded not to capture every soul, but to preserve covenant, to follow the sacred thread that would lead from Adam to Noah, from Noah to Abraham, and from Abraham to Christ. Yet that omission does not mean these women were insignificant. Quite the opposite. They were the vessels through which life continued, the carriers of the next generation. Without them, there would be no future, no humanity, no story. Tradition suggests that Adam and Eve, created in divine perfection, were extraordinarily fertile. They lived not for decades, but for centuries. And in that time, the first couple bore not just dozens, but potentially hundreds of children. Even modern history offers a glimpse into this possibility. Valentina Vasilyev, a woman from 18th century Russia, is said to have given birth to 69 children, and she lived only into her 70s. What then of Eve, who lived over 900 years, in a body untouched by the degeneration of time? When we consider this, the world Cain entered after his exile was not empty. It was already filling with the children and grandchildren of Adam and Eve, daughters who were never named, but who likely became wives, mothers, matriarchs, and among them perhaps was the woman who became Cain's wife. The Apocryphal Book of Jubilees dares to give these daughters names: Awan, Azura, figures lost in the shadows of Scripture but remembered in ancient tradition. Their names invite us to look closer, to consider what was hidden, to listen for the voices that history left behind. Because in the mystery of Cain's wife, we are not only asking about a single woman, we are confronting a greater silence, the forgotten legacy of the daughters of Eden. And as we step into that silence, a new set of questions arises. If these daughters existed, if they were the ones who carried humanity forward, then who exactly was Cain's wife? What do the texts truly say? And how have scholars, theologians, and believers tried to understand her story? That is where we go next. Who was Cain's wife? Theories and theological implications. The moment Cain's wife is mentioned in Genesis 4, verse 17, a wave of questions begins to stir. It is a single sentence. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. But behind that one line lies one of the most enduring mysteries in biblical history. Where did she come from? If Cain was among the firstborn children of the only 2 humans created by God, if he had been cast out and marked, then how could there have already been a woman for him to marry? It is a question that theologians, scholars, and faithful readers have pondered for generations. The most straightforward answer, and the one accepted by many throughout Christian history, is that Cain's wife was his sister, one of the unnamed daughters of Adam and Eve. While this might sound unsettling to modern ears, it was not seen as immoral in the earliest days of creation. In fact, it was a necessity. Genesis 5 verse 4 confirms that Adam had sons and daughters, and if humanity was to multiply, it could only do so through unions among siblings or close kin. In those early centuries, human genetics were uncorrupted. The bloodline was still pure. and the law that would one day forbid such unions in Leviticus had not yet been given. Some traditions offer names. The Book of Jubilees, for instance, names Awan as Cain's sister and wife. Her name, possibly derived from Phoenician or early Hebrew, has been interpreted to mean either vice or strength, a dual meaning that reflects the paradox of her story. A partner to a murderer, a mother to a child of legacy. Others propose that Cain may have married a niece, a daughter of one of his siblings, born many years later. This would align with a theory that Cain did not marry immediately after his exile, but only after decades had passed and the human population had expanded significantly. If Adam lived over 900 years, then by the time Cain built the city of Enoch, there may have been dozens, even hundreds of descendants from his own family tree. Still, there are those who have speculated further. Some scholars attempting to reconcile Genesis with archaeological evidence of early human civilization suggest a more controversial theory, that there may have been other humans created outside the line of Adam. Separate groups, different origins, people who coexisted but were not part of the covenantal story that Genesis tells. Yet this view remains speculative, and the Bible offers no explicit support for such an idea. Acts 17 verse 26 makes a clear declaration. From one man God made all the nations. The story of salvation begins with a single family, a single fall, and a single path to redemption. So while curiosity may lead us toward wider theories, the most theologically sound answer remains simple. Cain's wife was a member of his own extended family, a sister, a niece, a woman whose name was not recorded, but whose role was vital. But there is something else hidden in the text, a detail that often goes unnoticed. When Cain is sentenced by God, he pleads, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Everyone who finds me will kill me." Genesis 4, verse 14. Everyone. That one word suggests Cain believed there were others, that he was not alone. And God does not dismiss his fear. Instead, God places a mark on Cain, a divine seal, a warning to all others that Cain must not be harmed. So who were these others that Cain feared? Brothers, nephews, possibly even strangers from scattered settlements. Whether they were known or imagined, the text takes his fear seriously, which only deepens the mystery. In the end, Cain's wife remains unnamed, but not without meaning. She is part of a much larger silence, one that leads us back to ancient texts, lost traditions, and apocryphal accounts that dared to speak the names Scripture did not. And in those forgotten pages, we begin to uncover more than just identities. We uncover legacy. We uncover the voices of women whose presence shaped the destiny of the world. Let us now explore the traditions that dared to name them and what those names reveal. Apocrypha and the legacy of the forgotten women. In the quiet spaces between the verses of Genesis, where names are withheld and stories go untold, ancient tradition begins to whisper. Among the most intriguing of these whispers is the Apocryphal Book of Jubilees, a text sometimes called Little Genesis. Though it is not included in the canon of most Christian or Jewish Bibles, it carries echoes of a deeper story, one that dares to name the forgotten women of Eden. According to the Book of Jubilees, Cain's wife was named Awan. Her name appears in various forms across early Semitic texts, sometimes as Awan, sometimes as Aven, and in the Cave of Treasures, she is even called Kalima. But in every account, she is more than just a wife. She is a daughter of Adam and Eve, a sister to Cain, and the first woman to bring forth a child after Eden. Awan's name, rooted in ancient languages, can carry conflicting meanings. In some interpretations, it means vice, a word that seems to mirror Cain's own tragic descent. But in others, it is translated as power or potency, a reminder that from the darkest chapter of Genesis came new life, a child named Enoch, and with him the first city built in his name by his father, the marked wanderer. But Awan was not alone. The Book of Jubilees also names another daughter of Adam and Eve, Azura. She was given in marriage to Seth, the third son, born after the death of Abel. Unlike Cain, whose path led away from God, Seth was seen as a spiritual replacement for the son they had lost. And Azura, his sister wife, became the matriarch of a new and righteous line. In some traditions, Azura had once been Abel's intended wife, a woman marked by sorrow, widowed by violence. Yet in time she was joined to Seth, and through their union came Enosh, a child whose name means frail man, but whose legacy was anything but weak. Genesis 4, verse 26, speaks of Enosh's generation. It was then that people began to call upon the name of the Lord. This was more than a cultural shift. It was a spiritual reawakening, a return to worship, a moment where humanity, broken and scattered, turned their hearts back toward the Creator. And Azura stood at the beginning of that turn. Her presence, like Awan's, was not recorded in the sacred text of Genesis, but their lives echo through the generations, carriers of the next chapter, mothers of nations, hidden pillars in the foundation of God's redemptive plan. These women remind us that history is not always written with ink. Sometimes it is written in lineage, in faith, in the silent strength of those who bear life in the midst of chaos. They also invite us to ask a deeper question. What else was left unspoken? What truths lie buried beneath the surface of the biblical narrative? And what happens when we dare to look beyond the canon? To explore not for doctrine, but for perspective. Not for certainty, but for wisdom. Because in the names Awan and Azura, we find more than history. We find the beginnings of a spiritual contrast, one that runs like a river through the pages of Scripture. From Cain and Awan came a line marked by innovation, but also separation from God. From Seth and Azura came a line of reverence, worship, and covenant. And in that unfolding contrast, we begin to see two distinct paths, two visions of what it means to be human, one rooted in rebellion, the other in redemption. That contrast deepens even further when we explore the staggering lives of those who followed, lives that stretched across centuries, lives that carried the memory of Eden in their blood, and the hope of restoration in their hands. Let us now look to the ancient lifespans and what they reveal about the world that once was. Lifespans, lineages, and the loss of sacred time. In the ancient pages of Genesis, time moves differently. Lives stretch beyond comprehension. Generations are born alive and die all within the lifetime of a single man. Adam himself lived 930 years. His son Seth lived 912, and his grandson Enosh 905. These are not numbers meant to impress. They are windows into a world untouched by what we now call age. Before the flood, before nations, before law, there was a purity in creation, a closeness to the divine, a world where the breath of God still lingered in the soil and where the human body had not yet fractured under the weight of sin. Methuselah, the grandson of Enoch, lived 969 years, the longest lifespan recorded in Scripture, and yet his life, like the others, was not remembered for its length alone. It was remembered for its place in the unfolding story of redemption. Because in those centuries, each generation passed not only blood, but belief, a sacred thread woven through time. But why were these lives so long? And why did they grow shorter after the flood? Some believe the earth itself was different, that before the deluge, the environment shielded humanity. The atmosphere was stable, the climate balanced. Creation had not yet been disrupted by cataclysm. In this view, long life was not miraculous. It was normal, a reflection of divine design. Others point to the human genome. In the beginning, Adam and Eve were created in perfection. Their DNA was pure, their bodies unmarred by generations of mutation. The decline in lifespan, then, was not punishment, but progression, a slow fading of what once was whole. Then in Genesis 6, verse 3, we find a turning point. God declares, "My spirit shall not always strive with man. For that he is also flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. This was not just a limit, it was a shift, a reorientation of human life from quantity to purpose. After the flood, lifespans begin to collapse. Noah, who lived before and after the flood, reached 950 years. But Abraham lived only 175, Isaac 180, Jacob 147, and Moses, the great lawgiver, 120, the very number spoken by God. This reduction wasn't random, it was spiritual design. In a world growing darker, more complex, and more corrupt, God shortened the days, not to curse, but to reframe, to turn attention not toward how long we live, but how well we walk with Him. It is also here that we see the transition from survival to covenant, from longevity to legacy. The human story was no longer about filling the earth. It was about being set apart, chosen, consecrated. And in this grand timeline, the daughters of Eden, the Awans and Azuras, stood at the very beginning. Their wombs carried these lives. Their voices taught the early prayers. Their hands raised children who would remember Eden not as myth but as memory. The great men of Genesis, Adam, Seth, Enosh, Methuselah, Noah, walked across time like giants. But behind them stood the forgotten women, unnamed in the text, yet essential in the unfolding of salvation. As we now bring this journey through mystery, lineage, and sacred silence to a close, one final truth remains. Not every name was recorded, not every answer given, but what is left behind in blood and breath, in brokenness, tells us more than we think. In the end, the silence around Cain's wife is not just a gap in the biblical record, it is a mirror, a reflection of all the unseen hands that have shaped the human story, of the lives not recorded, the voices not preserved, and yet without them, nothing could have moved forward. Maybe that is the deeper lesson hidden in this mystery, that God does not only work through those who are named, He works through those who are forgotten, through sisters never mentioned, through daughters who bore the weight of humanity without recognition, through women like Awan and Azura, quiet, faithful, enduring. Sacred figures in the margins of sacred text. It reminds us that history is not only written by those who stand in the light. Sometimes it is carried forward by those who remain in the shadows, by those whose names were lost, but whose legacy lives on in the breath of every generation. And perhaps that is where we find ourselves today, in a world still asking old questions. Who was she? Why wasn't she named? How many others were there? And what else have we yet to uncover? But more importantly, who do we forget in our own lives? Who are the unseen people bearing the weight of what comes next? Because the mystery of Cain's wife is not only about ancient origins, it is about how we see those around us, and whether we are willing to find meaning even in the quietest corners of the story. If this journey spoke to you, if it opened a new layer of wonder or sparked a question you had never considered before. I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more biblical investigations like this one. Share it with someone who loves uncovering the hidden paths of Scripture. And most importantly, leave a comment below. Who do you believe Cain's wife truly was? Do you accept the apocryphal accounts? Or do you find deeper meaning in the silence itself? Your voice may help someone else rediscover faith in the details they once overlooked. Thank you for joining me in this exploration. May the wisdom of the Word continue to surprise you. May the mystery draw you closer, not farther. And may the stories left untold remind you that even in silence, God is still speaking.